Hi, patrons. It's Queen Auset-Heru, and thank you for joining me for another edition of Magical Minutes. So, let's get down to business. Someone asked me a question for this week's episode, and the question is, how do you learn to read tarot? Now, tarot is not easy. I practiced and studied tarot for 7 years before I started to read professionally. Now, that's not to say that if you have any kind of like gifts, if you're intuitive of any kind, you probably can pick up a deck of cards, tarot, or whatever, and be able to give some sort of a reading. Okay, just by looking at what's going on in the picture, you can pretty much tell. But tarot is a complex set. It's so much better, it's so much richer of a reading if you learn, if you study the symbolism, if you know the color correspondences. So when you ask me how do you learn to read tarot, you study the same way you learn to take an engine apart, the same way you learn how to drive a car, the same way you learn how to make certain meals. You study, you get some books. In my case, there's a lot of tarot books out there. I like Tarot Reversals by Mary K. Greer. That's the name of the book. It is my favorite tarot book, and it's around here somewhere in pieces because I've had it for so long and used it as a reference material for so long that it has fallen apart. It's not even falling apart, it has fallen. It's already done. It's time for me to order another one. So that's my favorite book. But there are a lot of books on how to read tarot. And basically, any one of them that explains how to understand the symbolism. Any Joe can pull one card and figure out what that one card is trying to say. But can you get direct answers to your questions? Can you do a 3-card spread? Can you do a Tree of Life spread? Do you even know what that means? So that's what I'm saying, is that there's so much terminology, there's so many symbols on the cards. You know, there's so much more going on than what you might intuitively see. Or let's say you have a deck that has keywords on it. The one I showed in the thumbnail for this video is the Lovers. So when you look at that card, you'll see some people on it, and they're like, engaged in some kind of romantic or emotional energy, something like that. So looking at it, you like, okay, this got to be a romantic situation between two, and I think sometimes it's 3 people on the card. So sometimes somebody making a choice between lovers. So it has something to do with romance, but you really don't know exactly. And if you only have one key word, you're missing out on the richness of that reading. So if you pull 1 card or 2 cards, there's a lot going on in that card. I'll give you a perfect example. My favorite card is the Star. One of my favorite cards is the Star. The Star represents the Aquarius. So if somebody gets the Star card in the upright or the reverse, it means 2 different things. So if my question is, am I going to get the role in the school play, and I pull the Star in the upright, the chances are very high that I'm going to get that role in the school play. But if you don't know all of the things that the Star can possibly mean, you might think it means purification. You might think it means blessings. You might think it means Aquarius. You might be like, oh, this is saying there's an Aquarius going to come into your life. When in reality, it's saying that that person is going to be the star of the show. And if you haven't studied the cards and studied the correspondences and so forth and so on, you're going to be sitting there confused and confusing your clients, which is definitely a deadly sin. You don't want to confuse the client. So reading tarot is all about studying symbolism, understanding the symbols that are on the card, understanding the colors. What do the numbers mean? What zodiac, what planets tie into that particular card? Reading tarot is about understanding everything you're looking at on that card. And a lot of it is symbolism. For example, on the High Priestess card, the High Priestess is carrying a pomegranate. The pomegranate is representational to a lot of people. Some people say fertility, but most people say wisdom. So if you're asking a question about your intelligence, or you're asking a question about passing a test or something like that, and you get the High Priestess in the upright, that could be saying that your wisdom and your knowledge is enough to pass that test. But if you don't know what that pomegranate means, you might think it's all about spirituality, because that's another thing that the priestess represents. So you have to learn all of the things that the cards represent, how to know if it's in the upright or the reverse, if you choose to do upright and reverse, because I definitely always do. And if you don't, you need to know how to read them when they come up with other cards. You need to know how to do spreads. You need to know how to formulate questions so that when you shuffle, you get the right answers from your client. Your client might say to you, what season will my husband come home from the war, for example? Well, if you have been studying the cards, you know that each suit represents a different season. For example, Pentacles represents years, but it also represents the winter time. So if somebody asked me that question and I got the 10 of Pentacles, I'd be like, so her husband would be home in the wintertime. But if I didn't study it, all I'm going to see is the 10 of Pentacles and be like, what does that have to do with a season? Is the 10 of Pentacles is about money and family. So I wouldn't have any clue as to what that had to do with a season. So the way to be able to read tarot is to study it. Get a good book and study all the symbolisms, memorize them so that when they come up, you know what they're talking about. That's what I did. Some people take a class. A class is okay. It depends on your learning style. I do better with teaching myself things. So I do better with getting a book or 2 or 3 and teaching myself the symbolisms and the colors and the correspondences. Some people can't learn like that. So they need audio, or they need a class, or they need some other kind of visual, maybe a video or something like that. So depending upon how you learn is how you would go about that. But find yourself some educational modalities and use them. And yes, you probably can use your intuition up front, but there's a lot more to those cards. So take your time and learn so you can give your clients or yourself better readings. The more you study, the better the readings that you will give. Okay? And that's how to learn how to read tarot. Now, if you're reading oracle cards, it's much easier, which is what I usually recommend for beginners, because an oracle card, you do not need to know how to read anything. All you got to do is sit, get quiet, pull, shuffle, pull the card, and then the oracle booklet tells you exactly what it means. So it's much easier if you're a beginner. Okay? So that was our magical minutes for this week. See you next time, and thank you for being patrons. Bye.